Our next speaker is the host of the Joe Thomas in the Morning show in Charlottesville, and also the Afternoon Constitutional, which is syndicated in Washington, D.C. and in Richmond. Please welcome Joe Thomas.
I had to make sure the last part was in there, otherwise it sounded really silly to say Joe Thomas is here. He's the host of the Joe Thomas Show. I want to thank John and the entirety of the Jefferson area libertarians for inviting me to be here, and I'm glad that I wasn't the only one that found some somewhat less than pop culture parts of the Bill of Rights to talk about, so thank you for that, Robert. Obviously, being a radio personality, you would presume that I would speak about the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and through my radio career, my postings have been fraught with a common thread: abuse of eminent domain. And that's why when I was asked to be here, I said, no, I want to speak about the part of the Fifth Amendment that doesn't get talked about here. I plead the Fifth on all the cop shows and the lawyer shows, and so much of it has to do with your defense against the authorities. And the part of it that's the most important, I think, and gets so misused is someplace that does speak a little bit of the legalese that Robert spoke about right at the end, when it says, and unlike the Declaration of Independence, actually uses the Scottish common law phrase life, liberty, or property, which they didn't want to use in the Declaration of Independence. Without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. And this is where they left, unfortunately, a very big loophole for what I think Robert spoke a little bit about, is the interpretation and our own inner or internal morality. Because when somebody wants something, when somebody insists they have to have something, there is a decided attitude, and you can tell it was there in the 18th century as much as it is here in the 21st century, to, as Larry the Cable Guy puts it, get her done. And too often it has been my experience that first, though I was not here during the Vinegar Hill days, in the places where I've been, Wilmington's waterfront redevelopment, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Richard Saha, and so on and so forth, Lancaster City trying to build a baseball stadium on somebody's farm, recalcitrant farmer who didn't want to sell it. Often what is used is condemnation, then eminent domain, so that the municipal governments, inspired by the get-her-done attitude, say, well, we don't want to pay market value for this by what somebody in the market is paying for it, so we will move to condemn the property first, and then take what the fair market value on the condemned property would be. And that's a very dangerous precedent. We saw after Kelo some Supreme Court rulings, even in the dissent, be made very clear that you could go out and make it much more carefully worded in your state constitutions, and some states took rise to this, to make it very clear what your state determines to be public use. Because there were some states like Newland, like Connecticut, that it was relatively vague in their constitution as what the public good was. As a matter of fact, in Connecticut, the specific wording was the public good. So when they said, we're taking your homes to build more expensive homes to increase our tax revenue, the case was made in court that it was for the public good, and all these good things that we would do with additional tax revenue. So the Fifth Amendment has, this specific part of it has to be very carefully combated within our local courts, with our local attorneys and our local defense attorneys specifically, being very clear, and you have to be very voracious in your own individual defense of it, because it is in the interpretation, and you have to be very careful of government saying, we want this, because as Robert detailed, so much of this document was built around a bill of can'ts. Government can't. You shall not. The second part of what I told John I would speak about is the controversy that swirled around this document. And we addressed it briefly this morning with a fellow who knows a thing or two about fighting for it, Attorney General Cuccinelli. And he and I were of the same mind about it. This document was necessary, and thank you for reading that in the preamble, because that's an important part. Because it might as well have said, okay, Patrick, we're putting this in so you guys vote for this. Because Patrick Henry and George Mason were very adamant that Virginia was not going to ratify any constitution that didn't go a little further in making it very clear the government could not. And they felt that the Constitution was too vague. Madison argued that the point was, if we're basing this on the idea that these are natural rights and that everything is your right, that we shouldn't have to write them down. And his deep-seated fear was that once written down on a government document, they became government property, and that somewhere along the line, somebody in government would say, well, we gave them to you in this. We don't think that, I don't know, pick one randomly, that Second Amendment is appropriate anymore, so we're going to take it away. And that was what Madison was afraid of. And we're teetering in a place where Madison may be borne out in his concern for writing them down, codifying them. And I think the final vote was 88 to 80 that Virginia agreed to ratify the Constitution. It was that close to Virginia, which was probably going to take 7 or 8 other colonies with it, out of the Constitutional Convention. So that was the controversy that swirled around Virginia, the Bill of Rights itself, its existence, and its necessity for the Constitution. And it's why it's so carefully worded and anointed in the preamble that these are prohibitions on the government. And it's one of the things that, as Tea Party members, as voting members, we have to look for representatives that are ready to stand down. Too many of our representatives, whether they're here in Charlottesville City Hall, the Lane Auditorium down the block, Richmond, and Washington, are ready to take more power by telling people, I'll bring you things. I'm going to get you things. I'm going to get you a doctor's visit. I'm going to get you meds. I'm going to make gay marriage okay. Guess what? You know what? You want to hear something really controversial? Gay marriage is fine. You know what's not fine? The government being involved in marriage at all.
I agree.
Hear, hear. The marriage between two people is the purview of your faith and should be a matter for your church. As a matter of fact, if you go back to Europe, where much of Scottish common law comes from, and our common law, where are all the marriage records? In the church. Now, I may not want to, have a gay marriage myself, but that doesn't mean you can't, or you can't. I have no right over that, because, as this document and the preceding document point out, your right to have a marriage with whoever you want to marry does not impede my right to live my life. And that, at the end of the day, is the essence of what all this is about. And that is what is at the core of American exceptionalism. It's not our ability to build better computer processors or brick a better mall. American exceptionalism is this country was an exception to the rule. The rest of the world was, and for the most part still is, ruled by despotic top-down regimes dressed up as parliamentary democracies, though most of them may be. They come from the top, and these rights, very similarly, are in the Magna Carta. There was a Bill of Rights in the Magna Carta that the Lords wanted the king to put in there to sort of a guarantee, because the king was giving the rights to the Lords of England at the time. We flipped it over. When it's American exceptionalism, it's that America as a concept is the exception to the rule. We've forgotten that, We're teetering on becoming just like everybody else in the world. And we need to stand up, and I think November was the first salvo in a pushback to where this country regains its exceptional status. Thank you for having me. Thank you very much, and happy birthday, Bill of Rights.